You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner, who's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day.
And we're dealing with two books today, probably Ezra and Nehemiah, but they are separate. But I wanted to show some similarities between them. But before we do that, let's look at this Hebrew word. In Ezra chapter 4, verse 7, it actually says that he's going to be writing and translating this from the Aramaic. So it actually has the word Aramaic in it. So here, that word is Aramaic, but the word right before it is a foreign word. And the way we know that is it has actually 4 root radicals. Oh, Tyler, remember a Hebrew almost always has 3 root radicals.
Right.
So in this case, we can actually tell it's a foreign word. So I thought, well, that's kind of fun. I wanted to show you how we know that.
Yeah.
All right. No, go on.
Well, I was going to ask, like, when this gets brought into Hebrew, are the radicals kind of representing the sounds of the original word? Is that how that's working?
Yeah, that's my guess, is that they're doing their best. And remember, Aramaic has the same script as later Hebrew. So my guess is there wouldn't have been a whole lot of changes that happened because they would have looked similar.
Yeah. It fit in the alphabet.
Yeah. Okay. Because I felt like I cheated you a little, I actually have another one for you today.
Okay.
I wanted you to see this name in Ezra chapter 4, verse 7. It's got the name Tabbaal, and which means God is good. And notice it has the word ale at the end.
Yeah.
So now in Isaiah, it has a similar name, and it might have been the same name, but now they've changed the vowel. So it's now good for nothing because it's got the word not at the end, or nothing. Yeah. So it's actually kind of funny. It's very possible that this guy, because I doubt that any mother would have called their son or father good for nothing. I would think anyway. Yeah. So my guess is that probably even in the Isaiah passage, it initially was Tabbaal, meaning God is good. They changed it because it was he was the one they were going to put on the throne instead of. Do you remember the passage? They were going to put that on the throne. Pekah and Rezin were going to put this guy on the throne who would follow their will. Yeah. So it's funny. The biblical author, I think, changes his name to Tabbaal, good for nothing, or no good kind of thing. So,
and how can you pronounce them next to each other so we can kind of hear the difference just in that last?
Yeah, here's the one, Tabbaal. Actually, what's happened is at the end, when the word is accented, it actually like this one's at the end of the word, so it actually marks. That's a saluk. It's a different accent than what you'd expect. So this probably is Tabal, and Tabbaal is the difference. So it's kind of funny. It's one little change, but it makes a significant difference in the name.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
It's so helpful to hear. It's good to hear that, I think, even though, probably most people listening can't necessarily understand Hebrew or like hearing it and seeing like what the radicals are. But I think that's so helpful just because that's the kind of little wordplay that's easy to miss in translation work.
Right. In fact, in Hebrew, when you're translating it over, you'd never even catch that hardly.
Yeah.
So that's what both of those are kind of like that.
Yeah.
All right. Here's my chart for both Ezra and Nehemiah, and we're going to do them separately. But initially, I wanted to show you that you've got actually. Well, first of all, you got some history. It talks about Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel, and it talks about them coming to Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically, for the first 6 chapters, it's a history of what's happened. Yeah. Then you get to Ezra, and Ezra is about 458, dated to that date. And it's interesting because now we've got Ezra's memoirs telling what happened when he came. Then we've got what looks like Nehemiah's memoirs, chapters 1 through 7 in Nehemiah. Then it goes back, in my mind, to Ezra's memoirs again in chapter second part, and that's in Nehemiah. And then Nehemiah's memoirs 11 through 13 in Nehemiah. So the books are quite closely related, and in the Hebrew text, they're actually thought to be one book. often counted as one book.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. But they are intricately related, and you can see that by how it bounces back and forth between the author. What's happening.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Ezra.
Get into Ezra. Okay.
And specifically, it's rebuilding spiritually. Now, remember, Ezra's a scribe.
Yeah.
And so his job is to teach the law. And basically, at this point, they have been back and they got back to Israel following the Babylonian conquest or captivity.
Captivity. Yeah.
Yeah. They've been there now for, since about 539. So they've been there almost 100 years. And they're getting bogged down. Remember, the whole reason they were going to come was to build the temple and do all that. Well, in 520, they actually do get or 516, they actually do get the temple rebuilt finally, but not, it doesn't really change them much spiritually. So at this point, I think God sends Ezra and later Nehemiah to get them going again and recharge them, and especially spiritually. Ezra was crucial to actually getting them living rightly again.
Yeah.
The problem is some of the same things, like they are marrying foreign wives and stuff like that. Well, when Nehemiah comes, the same kind of problems are happening. So he comes like 15 years later, 13 years later, and got some of the same problems he had when Ezra came and tried to get him spiritually motivated again.
Right.
So it's a little discouraging, but
Yeah.
God does send the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
So he's a scribe or a secretary, and he inspired a religious revival through reading the law, and that's going to be in Nehemiah.
Yeah.
Remember, I told you Nehemiah has a second part that talks about Ezra, and so in Nehemiah 8 is about Ezra reading the law to the people. Nehemiah is a different kind of person. He's a cupbearer, so he's more a political kind of person, but in that he's a cupbearer, that means that the king really trusts him.
Yeah.
And when we get to Nehemiah, we'll talk more about that. But imagine he's the one, a cupbearer was the one that tasted the wine before the king to make sure it wasn't poisoned or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that means he's got to trust him with his life. And so that's going to be really important when we get to Nehemiah, because remember, Sanballat and Tobiah and some of these guys are going to try to get him in trouble. Well, it's kind of not going to work because Artaxerxes trusts him with his life. So it's just funny that God chose the right people at the right time to do what he needed.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay. All right, let's go to the next one. So the purpose of it is Ezra and Nehemiah is a continuation of Chronicles theological history. And so remember how we heard about God using the Northern Kingdom and David specifically and Solomon, and especially building up the temple and stuff like that. Well, Ezra and Nehemiah are going to be basically a continuation of that. And remember, last time when we read Chronicles, I had you read the very last part of it, and it's the same as Ezra. And we talked about those two probably so you know where they came together.
Yeah.
So I guess at least that's my guess as to why this book was written, to help encourage the people also. Okay. All right. It's interesting. There's a first and second Esdras that's an apocryphal book. So it sounds very similar in name, but it's dated to about the 2nd century BC.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, Jewish tradition says that Ezra wrote both Chronicles and Ezra Nehemiah. We don't know that for sure, but it is the tradition anyway. And the date is about 400. Remember, we told you that Chronicles was about 400. These ones are probably about that same date, but the content of them actually goes back further. So Ezra came in 458, and then Nehemiah comes in about 444. Yeah. So again, they're 12, 13 years apart, but they probably were recorded a little later than that. So probably some of our later things that are written in the Old Testament. One other interesting thing about it is the language. There's a major part. Do you remember, just like in Daniel, there's a major part of it that's written in Aramaic?
Right.
Yeah, the same is true in Nehemiah, Ezra, Nehemiah. In Ezra, it's 4:8 through 6:18, and then 7:12 through 12 through 26, and then the rest of it's in Hebrew. My guess is that those are probably letters or records that were written in Aramaic initially, and so they just brought them over into their books, probably. Yeah, and that's what I think happened in the Daniel passage too.
Same thing.
Also, yeah.
No, you said earlier Aramaic characters are the same, basically. So what's the difference between these languages? Is it lots of like grammar rules, how they, pronunciation? What all is different in Aramaic and Hebrew?
Yeah, it'd be a pronunciation mainly because and the accents, where they're accented. My guess is if you knew Aramaic really well, you could do your Hebrew real well, and vice versa. If you knew Hebrew, you could understand Aramaic pretty well. They would sound different when they talked, but a lot of the rules and a lot of the consonants are going to be the same.
So written would be a little easier to.
Yeah. In fact, I've got something to show you later on that will help you see that. In fact, I think it's this next slide. Yeah. This part here, verse 7, is actually in let's see, it's in Hebrew. And there's our word Aramaic. I've circled it there for us. Then starting at verse 8, it's going into Aramaic. And you might not be able to tell, but do you see I've highlighted that aleph?
Yeah.
That aleph is an article on this word for book.
Oh,
this is an article on the word for king. So what's happened is that instead of putting a hey at the beginning for an article in Hebrew, they put it at an aleph at the end. So almost immediately, but notice a lot of those consonants and everything look alike, right?
Yeah, sure.
So they'd look at these things and they'd probably say, oh, that's really similar to what I already knew. Some of these really long words, like this one is a really long words. Those are names. That I think that's Artaxerxes right there. So in the Hebrew, what they did is or Aramaic, they just translated the letters over into Hebrew so that the consonants would look similar for them. Yeah. But you can see it's a really long name, and that's
for sure
really unusual in Hebrew. So there's just a few little changes, some differences. Usually Hebrew has longer vowels at the beginning and shorter vowels at the end, and Aramaic is just opposite of that. Usually has shorter vowels at the beginning and longer vowels at the end. Yeah. So just some, and then a few words are different, but a good share of them are the same too.
Yeah.
So I thought that might be helpful for you.
Yeah.
All right. Historically, there's very little difference between the destroyed Israel of 586 and that of the Israel in 500 and 400. The city laid in ruins, but in 516 or 515, the temple was finally rebuilt. But remember in Nehemiah, they still had the walls torn down. Right. So what was happening is anybody who wanted to come in and take whatever they wanted could do that.
Yeah.
So that's why Nehemiah was real discouraged, because when his brothers, the people came from Jerusalem and told him how bad it was there. And so I think it's good to let you know historically, it's very similar to what happened right after the destruction. Yeah. And it hadn't improved a whole lot by then.
Yeah.
So, all right, this is the Persian Empire, and I think you can see it. Here's Susa, and it goes all the way. It contained all this, but that's how far they had to go. So it's like 800, 900 miles to go from probably somewhere in Persia all the way to Jerusalem. So that's, it usually took them about a month to go 400 miles. So my guess is this is about a 2 to 3 month trip of trying to get over there. Yeah. So you can imagine they wouldn't want to go unless they had a good reason to.
Sure.
Yeah. So, All right. Okay. Purpose for the book. The history, it records the history from Cyrus's decree, 539, to Nehemiah's second governorship, which is sometime after 433. It's to install hope in the Israelites following the exile by showing God's faithfulness in this period, very similar to what Chronicles was doing.
Yeah.
And this one is actually even real clear that it's highlighting the covenant renewal and revival. Remember, that's the whole reason Ezra comes back, is to get them connected with God again.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what he was doing. I think I already told you this, but the reforms in Haggai and Zechariah around 520 and the ones in Ezra and Nehemiah are pretty much the same. They were marrying foreign wives. They were doing usury, similar kind of things that happened. So I'm afraid these revivals didn't last very long, and that's a little sad, I think.
Yeah.
So, all right, here gives you some history. So these are the Persian kings across the top. And then across the bottom are the kind of things that were happening during those times. Yep. So Xerxes, you've got Esther. Return of Ezra was in Artaxerxes the first. Return of Nehemiah and the same king. We know that Nehemiah goes back for about 12 years and governs Jerusalem again. So the first time he doesn't stay as long. The second time it seems like he lasts longer. Yeah. So, all right. Okay, here's my book on. This is my book summary for just Ezra itself. I've got here God's religious restoration. The date's about 400 BC. Author is unknown, but traditionally it was thought to be Ezra. Yeah. Key verses, I've got some there, and the purpose to encourage that post-exilic remnant to live for God. This one is really clearly, it's the spiritual revival. Yeah. Okay. I told you already that Ezra 1 through 6 is pretty much history. It's what happened before Ezra even gets there. Yeah. So it talks about the return or the decree of Cyrus. It starts with then the return under Sheshbazzar and under Zerubbabel, then the building the altar and the temple, and then that's all done. Then in the second part, Ezra finally gets there. So now his arrival is in chapter 7 and 8, and then his reforms are in 9 and 10. Yeah. So that helps you kind of see what's happening. So I put the dates down here. The first part is basically history, and I figure it's from 539 to 515. Then Ezra comes about 458. So that's the present time. Oh, one really cute thing is when Ezra gets all upset about the people having mixed marriages and stuff like that, he sits on the ground and he pulls out his own hair. What's funny is when Nehemiah does it later, he sits them down and he pulls out their hair, it says. So, so it's actually really funny.
Yeah, changes directions a little bit.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Okay, let's get into some key ideas first. The spiritual restoration of Jerusalem. Yahweh is a covenant-keeping God because he is the one who sends Ezra back, and it's real clear. And then the last one is the problems of the post-exilic community. And that was the idea of their intermarrying with foreigners and stuff like that. Now, the reason that Nehemiah and Ezra get so upset with that is because that's what got him in trouble the first time. That's what sent them into captivity. They were intermarrying with these false religions. And remember, Solomon had so many wives, and it says his many wives led his heart away from God. Yeah. Well, that didn't change a whole lot since during that time. And finally, God gets so upset with them, he sends them off into captivity. He had warned them that that's what would happen if you didn't change your ways and stuff like that. And so, but that's why now Ezra and Nehemiah want to treat this really seriously, because they don't want to get back in that kind of situation they were in before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. All right. What I'll do is I'll give you kind of the history, and then I'll read some biblical passages to explain that.
Yeah.
But the first year of Cyrus, that 539, and that's the one we've read already, but let me do it again. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, and I don't know if you remember, but Jeremiah had told them that the captivity was only going to be for 70 years.
Oh, right.
So that's why they keep reminding them that.
Yeah.
And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me the kingdoms of this earth, and he has appointed me to build a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem." So, I think I told you this before, that Cyrus is a really good pagan. He wants as many gods on his side as possible. Right. So if Yahweh is another god, and he definitely wants him on his side. So when he thought the best way to do that was to build a temple for him and then have them pray to their God for him. Mm-hmm. So that's basically the logic of what he was doing there.
Right.
The problem is they started rebuilding, and they only lasted about 2 years, and they get so discouraged that they quit building. So that's why, at 539, basically when the decree goes out, they don't get the temple built for another 20 some years. Right. Okay. So that's part of the logic of what was going on there, and how the times in post-exilic are kind of sad times.
Yeah.
All right. One of the people that was the main leaders was a guy named Sheshbazzar. Mm-hmm. In verse 4 of chapter 1, it says, "Every survivor at whatever place he may live, let him take men of that place, support him with silver and gold, with goods and cattle, together with a freewill offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem." So he was collecting people and money so that they could go back and rebuild the temple.
Okay.
They also got to take back the vessels. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had taken all the temple vessels and stuff. Yeah. Well, they got to take them back. They hadn't lost them. They had been in the Babylonian treasuries, and then when the Persians took over, they put them in theirs. So there were 5,400 of them that were supposed to have been taken back.
Wow.
Let me show you this first, and then I'll show you one other thing. This is the Cyrus cylinder. This is a little, it's a little piece of clay that records Cyrus's decree about sending the people back. So this is just one of the a little quote from it, but it says, "I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king. May all the gods whom I have resettled in their sacred cities ask daily for Bel and Nebo for a long life for me, and may they recommend me to him. To Marduk, my lord, they may say this: Cyrus the Great, who worships you," and then it goes on. But the reason I put this in here, because some people think that Cyrus was a God-fearer, and I think it's pretty clear. He's not just a single God-fearer. He fears all the gods, and his main gods are Bel and Nebo and Marduk. Those were the Persian gods or Babylonian gods that he had conquered. Right. So I just wanted to make sure you knew this is pretty clear. Those ones are the ones he worships, not Yahweh.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like there's a kind of practical element of his cosmology here, right? Yeah. He's saying I did a favor, for all these other gods, and I let them go back to where they're supposed. But what I need back is for you to kind of put a good word for me and the ones that are important to me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of the tit for tat kind of thing.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Josephus even talks about Cyrus. He actually says, "Thus said Cyrus the king, Since God Almighty has appointed me to be king of the habitable earth, I believe that he is the God which is the nation of Israelites worship. For indeed he foretold my name by the prophets that I should build him a house at Jerusalem in the country of Judea. Now, remember, Isaiah chapter 45, we talked about that in Isaiah, that it actually mentions Cyrus and that. My guess is that Cyrus, I don't think Cyrus probably really read scripture and knew his name was there.
Yeah.
But Josephus makes it sound like he did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it says, this was known to Cyrus by his reading the book which Isaiah left behind him of his prophecies. For this prophet said that God had spoken thus to him in a secret vision. My will is that Cyrus, whom I have appointed to be king over many and great nations, send back my people to their own land and build my temple. This was foretold by Isaiah 140 years before the temple was demolished. Accordingly, when Cyrus read this and admired the divine power, an earnest desire and ambition seized upon him to fulfill what was written. So that's what Josephus says about him. I'm pretty sure that's probably not the way it occurred, but at least that's the history recorded there.
That's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
I thought you should see it from Josephus's own words too.
Yeah.
So there's the Persian Empire. You can see how big it is. It was one. You know what the Pony Express is? Do you remember in America we had the Pony Express? Mm-hmm. They said that it would take 21 days for a horse riding, galloping from one side of the Persian Empire to the other side. Wow. And that's how they did their communications too. Yeah. So, yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, it's a huge empire by that time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. In chapter 1, it actually lists some of the gold. In verse 11, it says there's 5,400 vessels in all. But then
for the temple, being returned to the temple.
Sorry, but when he add them up, it's only about 2,499. So my thing is, where's the rest of them? That it's like missing about 3,000 vessels or so, or not quite that. Anyway, my guess is there's possibilities. Like it could be a textual error, could be just a summary of the list, or it could be excerpts of the list. I have a feeling it's that excerpts of the list so that it doesn't, or a summary, so that it doesn't have to record them all. The whole purpose is to show them that God got back everything that was taken from him.
Yeah.
And so by saying that they got all the 5,400 vessels back and then going through and listing a bunch of them, it's probably lets them know that, he didn't get ripped off. He actually did get all the stuff he was supposed to.
Yeah, sure. I can see that.
Yeah. All right. So I just thought that's one thing that's important. In chapter 2, that was in chapter 1. In chapter 2, there's a list of the returnees. And I don't know if you can see them here, but some of them are significantly different. Like, look at these last ones, these two lists. And now, what's also interesting is that a good share of the list are exactly the same.
Yeah.
Then you've got some, I highlighted these because some of the numbers, they're like in the units, like in the thousands or the hundreds or the tens or 1 units, they are off a little. So I'm wondering if when the, textual criticism could probably help us know that probably what happened is that the list after it gets copied so multiple times, it probably gets errors that creep into it. Mm-hmm. What's funny, though, is that some of these names are different. Now, this guy's not different. He's just in a different spot.
Right.
Yeah. And this guy's just in a different spot. But we've got 2 names there that are totally different. So I don't know if those would be taking the father's name instead of the son or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, by the end of it, it looks like there's about 1,000, maybe 1,200 number of differences in the 2 lists. Mm-hmm. But what's funny is they're supposed to be the same list. I mean, they're just recording who came. Yeah. So my guess is there's something with either corruptions that have come into the text by copying errors, or that they're numbering a different, instead of a father or a grandfather, that they probably maybe took a son or something like that in some cases. So, But I thought you should see that. It actually gives the number of people that come, both in Ezra and Nehemiah, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a little over 50,000. But apparently, 50,000 was a small number compared to the Jews that were living in Babylon at that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, because remember, it talks about there being such a small remnant that came back. And
Yeah,
so,
right.
yeah, so you've got that. All right. I'm teaching you some textual criticism while you're here, Tyler. Homileteleton is a mistake caused by two phrases that end similarly, and the scribe's eye can jump from one similar ending down to the next similar ending and miss everything in between.
Okay.
I think that's what happened in Ezra 2, 65 and 66, and Ezra 7, 67.
Okay.
I've tried to highlight it here. The word is thousands. I'm sorry, 100. So this one's 200 and this one's 245, but it would end with the word 100. My guess, and then if you look here, it's after you get to the singing men and women, it gets to there. All of this is gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the I skipped from the first 200 down to the second, leaving everything in between.
Oh, yeah.
Let me show you. Here's what I think it would look like in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So the 100 would be at the end of that verse, then it'd be at the end of that phrase. So he picked up this the 200, went down to that one, and missed all of this in between. Yeah. Just so you know, that's a common mistake that copyists make.
Sure.
So I just wanted to make sure we knew why things like this can happen in the biblical text. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's very understandable. You just skip to like the same word or something like that.
Yeah. And in the Hebrew, when you see the text, it makes it real clear. In the English, it was really hard to see what was going on. But here, it's pretty clear that it left all this stuff out here.
Yeah, right.
So I thought that was helpful. All right, in chapters 3 through 6, we've got probably the best description of what's actually happening in Israel that discouraged the Israelites. So basically, it says if you look at chapter 4, verse 2, it says that these people, Sanballat and Tobiah, and these guys that were people of the land, it says they'd been there since the time of Esarhaddon. Well, Esarhaddon was in 668 or 681 to 669. So and he's an Assyrian king. They are now in Cyrus's time. So that means that for over 100 years, they'd been in the land, living there.
Yeah.
Do you remember they were deported there? So they were originally Assyrians probably that got transferred over. Okay. So that's probably what was going on. But Nehemiah does not want them to join with them because as far as they're considered half breeds because they're half Jewish and half Assyrian. They're not totally dedicated to God.
Yeah.
So basically, Ezra makes it clear he doesn't want them to join with him, even though they claim that. Here's what they say: "Let us build with you, for we, like you, seek your God, and we have been sacrificing him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us up here." So Ezra doesn't buy that because he's pretty sure they're not totally dedicated to Yahweh.
Yeah. Right.
So you've got first they rebuild the altar. These are the Jewish people that come back. In the second year, the second month, they start rebuilding the temple. But even at that point, by the time they look at it, they're kind of discouraged, and then adversaries hinder their work. So there, for a long time, the temple just sat for like 18 years. It just sat there doing nothing.
Yeah.
So then chapter 4 makes it really clear how bad the adversaries had tried to hinder their work. So it's out of order, but this one in chapter 4, 24 through 6:12, it talks about the work on the temple stopped from 536 till about 520. So that's about 16 years, even though Darius had told them to rebuild it, right? And he even said that they could take from the treasury, the Persian treasuries, and take some of the building materials and everything.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. The second one then is in Ezra 4:5, and it says the people of the land hired counselors to work against the Israelites from Cyrus to Darius. That's about 20 years.
Yeah.
Then in verse 6, it talks about accusations during the reign of Xerxes. That's about 80 years. And then 4:7 through 23 talks about Ezra, accusations during the reign of Artaxerxes. And that's so that time would have stretched from anywhere from 90 to 100 years. So these guys, so start, you can see for about 100 years, these Israelites are being hammered with telling, we're going to tattle on you people and tell them that you, like, some of the threats were pretty serious. Like, they're going to dishonor the king. They're going to withhold their money. They're going to rebel like they did before. And then they're going to take over the whole area. That's almost funny. Remember, the Israelites can't even build their own temple, and they're claiming that they're going to take over the whole area. So my guess is these are just threats that are almost baseless, but they were enough to scare the Persian king. And so that's what was going on. So chapter 4 is really interesting. It's giving the history of what the people were going through. Yeah. Then in chapter 5, God sends Haggai and Zechariah to encourage the people to build again. And so in chapter 5, 1 through 2, it says, then the prophets Haggai and the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Jeshua the son of Jehozadak, rose and began to build the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. So that's kind of that's God sending his prophets at the right time to get them building again. Yeah. Now, the second one is kind of interesting. There's a letter from Tetaniah, and that he was one of them that got him to stop building, because they claim, the Jews claimed that they were that there was this decree that Cyrus said they could rebuild, but then when they went to look for it, at least initially they couldn't find it.
Oh my gosh.
In chapter 5, verse 17 says, now if it pleases the king, let a search be conducted in the king's treasure house, which is there in Babylon, and see that if there's a decree that was issued by King Cyrus to rebuild this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send his decision concerning this matter. So you can see they're doing everything to try to get them to stop rebuilding. Yeah, I mean, that would take months to prove that, right? Yeah, right. For that message to get all the way to Babylon, and then for the search to happen, and for it to be, And what's also funny is it's for some reason because the Persian Empire was so large, and they must have made decrees quite regularly, that a lot of times they get lost. I mean, this one we don't know how long it took, but we know that Cyrus gave it, and they're in the time of Darius's time, so that's 520. So so that's kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyway, the good news is in chapter 6, Darius did find the decree, and so and knew that it came from Cyrus. It was actually in the Ecbatana capital, which is the eastern one, and I think that's kind of funny. Again, Babylon was where they were looking. Where they actually finally found it was in totally the other side of their empire. So anyway, Darius says to let them keep building, and they're going to pay for it out of the royal treasury. Wow. So and so in chapter 6, verse 4 and 5, it says, and let the cost be paid from the royal treasury. Also let the gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple of Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, be returned and brought to their palaces in the temple of Jerusalem. And you shall put them there in the house of God. So here's God finally turning everything around for the Israelites. Right. All right, and in chapter 6, it's also kind of interesting because it makes it sound like that the temple is really small. Ezra, in verse Ezra chapter 3, verses 12 and 13 say, yet many of the priests and Levites and heads of the father's household, the old men who'd seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, while many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the the sound of weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud voice, and the sound was heard far away. But the problem is when you look at Ezra 3:2, it actually says that Zerubbabel's temple in chapter 6, verse 3, says it's 60 by 60 cubits. Solomon's temple in chapter 6 of First Kings was 60 by 20 by 30 cubits. So it makes it sound like, wait a minute, it's just as big, if not bigger.
Right.
But notice it said that the voices were when they saw the foundations laid. I don't know. I wished I'd had a picture of this now. In Jerusalem, we've now found some of Solomon's foundation stones, and they are huge. They are, some of them are 60 feet long.
Wow.
And they're at least 4 foot wide or even further than that. Sometimes you can't tell because they're inside the wall. But these things are huge. So my guess is that when the people saw it, the foundation didn't look anywhere near as elaborate as what they did before.
Right.
So you've got people on one side of them, weeping and saying, "Oh, this is terrible." Well, on the other side, they're ecstatic because at least it's getting built.
Sure. Yeah.
So Haggai also talks about the later temples seem like nothing in comparison. That gives you some clue. And then Zechariah says that some have despised the day of small things in the context of the temple. Yeah.
That's a funny way of putting that.
Yeah. So anyway, so it sounds like to me the temple was just as big, or at least it wasn't smaller, but it probably was nowhere near as ornate. And you can imagine Solomon, with all his wealth, could actually make the temple elaborate when Zerubbabel is probably, they're doing it out of the Persian money, and they're just trying to get it done. They're not trying to make it elaborate. Yeah. So that's the issue there. By the time you get done with chapter 6 in Ezra, you've got this history that they've now got up to the time of Ezra. So starting at 7, he's actually talking about him arriving there and all this. I thought it was interesting in chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, you've got Ezra's pedigree, and it goes all the way back to Aaron, the chief priest.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it goes on for 3 verses of whose son he is. And I just thought, I've never seen that anywhere else. So I thought that was really kind of interesting. So it goes all through these priesthood, and explains that Ezra is related to them. Yeah. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah. That's probably an important authority kind of establishment there, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's only one other time that I remember that something even like this, and I think it's Zephaniah, but it only goes on for a verse. This one goes all the way back to Aaron. So I think you're right. I think it was building credibility because they probably needed it by that time.
Right.
Yeah. So it talks about his arrival. He comes in during the time of Artaxerxes. It says he came from Babylon. He was a scribe skilled in law. Here's what the Bible says about him. This Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. And the king granted him all the requests because the hand of the Lord his God was upon him. So it's kind of interesting. He that's the one thing you know about Ezra. He's really one of the best scribes he could be. So I thought that was helpful.
Yeah.
Later it says that Ezra had set his heart to study the law of Moses and to practice it, verse 10. And then he comes to teach them about it. So that's his goal. Verse 10 makes it real clear. He's there to teach them the law.
Yeah.
All right. Then in chapters 9 and 10, we've got the reforms going on. And one of the problems was Ezra's foreign wives. And I've got there that Ezra tears his robe and pulls out his hair. Let me just read it for you. Now, when these things had been completed, the princes approached me, saying, "The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, according to their abominations, those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has been intermingled with the people of the lands. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness." So I thought it was interesting. Notice it says the priests and the Levites.
Right.
So if they're doing it, imagine then the people are going to fall right in and do it too, right?
Right.
Oh man! So they actually make a list of guilty people, and there's some of them. Wouldn't that be embarrassing to have your name on that list?
Yeah.
All right. So Ezra has a prayer of confession, and he talks about God has not left them as an escaped remnant. Remember, remnant means just a few people. So he's talking about they got out of Babylon, and now they're doing the same thing that put them in the first time. So the people ask Ezra to act, and the people are going to judge the guilty ones. The problem was it was going to take a lot longer than what they could fix in a day or two.
Yeah.
So chapter 9, verses 3-6 say, "And when I heard this matter, I tore my garment and my robe and pulled out some of the hair of my head and my beard and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of God on Israel on account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me and sat appalled until the evening's offering. At the evening offering, I rose from my humiliation, even with my garment and my robe torn, and fell on my knees and stretched up my hands to the Lord my God. And I said, Oh my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift up my face to you, my God, for our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens." So here's Ezra praying for his people and saying, I thought it was interesting. He's humiliated that the Israelites would act like this.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Well, and even in his prayer, it's fascinating. He said it's our iniquity. There's kind of a collective,
that's right,
guilt that he's feeling here.
Yeah. Oh. All right. Then in chapter 10, the people judged the guilty ones. So all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem within the 3 days, because they had said, we can't do it now, but let's all come back in 3 days and we'll do it. And it was the ninth month on the 20th of the month, and all the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter and the heavy rain. So apparently it was raining at that time.
Yeah.
Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, "You have been unfaithful and have married foreign wives, adding to the guilt of Israel. Now therefore make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will, and separate yourself from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives." Then all the assemblies replied with a loud voice, "That is right. As you have said, it is our duty to do so." So they actually admit that he's right, and they're going to finally get it taken care of. Then it ends up that they actually do. So that's how the book ends.
Yeah.
All right. So here's my conclusion. It was very difficult for the Israelites returning to the land, and they had much oppression. And that's what this book makes it real clear.
Yeah.
Ezra was an amazing tool for God to get the people moving in the right direction. And he, in fact, he was perfect because he was skilled in the law, and he was a good example and all that.
Yeah.
Then even the priests and Levites had married foreign women. This is one of the things that had got them into the Babylonian exile. Yeah. So it's quite a book. Yeah. All right. You have some questions for you.
Okay.
What is the purpose for the book of Ezra?
Yeah. Well, like you said at the beginning, it's kind of about returning to like the religious life in Israel. And it's kind of you're getting a theological history for the first couple chapters and kind of placing it in this context. But I think you're right. It's kind of like this is an encouraging book, but it's encouraging in that things need to move forward. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's such a fascinating image of like the temple is eventually built, but it's still kind of empty.
Yeah.
And Ezra's coming to try to get things restarted,
Yeah. I don't know if you saw it, but when we read that one part, it said they sat in the open square before the temple. So apparently there was a broad area that they could all stand there. So that means that the area was pretty, didn't have many people in it or many houses and stuff like that. And that's what we're going to find out.
Yeah.
So, all right. Where is obedience highlighted in the book and why?
I think Ezra's obedient. So you're getting some obedience there for sure.
Yeah.
He becomes a leader. So I think that's part of the reason he, he's going to be setting an example, very much opposed to like what a lot of the other leaders. And, I think we can assume the rest of the people following leaders had done, just in terms of obeying God's law.
Good. How about the people at the end?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing like a return essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I guess it's probably not complete because we're going to get more in Nehemiah, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's still hopeful, right? There's been a change of direction at least.
Yeah. And one of them, some of the passages actually in Ezra actually say how hard it was because the people even had children from these marriages. So that meant that was splitting families apart. And that's got to be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. But remember, it's so important because that's what got them in this trouble last time. Yeah. So it's all crucial that they've got to do it.
Yeah.
What is the key element to the reform?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just kind of got into it right there, right? It's obedience and kind of returning back to the conditions of the covenant.
Okay. Good.
And that's going to be painful.
Yeah. 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 Especially when they've done some of the things that they had done, didn't they? And then why were foreign wives punished so severely in this period?
Yeah. That was, part of it was that was a reason they got into this mess in the first place, right? There was always that question of how is Israel going to be set apart in the way that they're supposed to be if they're not acting set apart? They're acting the way their neighbors are acting.
Yeah.
My thought is there's another element of this too, of just when you're returning, there's a lot of questions of loyalty, I think. How do you reestablish a culture in a nation, and I think whether or not that's founded, I think there probably was a lot of fear around, that maybe if there's, if you don't have that kind of ethnic purity, maybe there was fear that there would be betrayals or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
That'd be my guess. But it's very severe, and it does feel a little foreign, I think, to us today. That sounds harsher than it ought to be, I think, to our ears.
Now let me add one more thing to it. Remember, marriage is a really the two become one. That's what the biblical text talks about. So if you've got foreigners mixing with Jewish people, before long, they're going to, what I usually see, it's not usually the Christians that are drawn. Usually the Christians are drawn down. I think that's part of the reason in the New Testament where it says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Because it's usually not the believers that are pulling the others up. It's usually just opposite of that. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. That's what they're worried about in this time period, that those foreign marriages will pull these Jewish people down. And also the intermixing, before long, you won't know the difference between the Jewish people and the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Persians. Remember that was the Babylonians and the Assyrians' goal. Their goal was to intermarry so much so that the people wouldn't even know they were Jewish anymore.
Right.
And I think that's what's going on here. And I think they're so worried that could happen again. Yeah. And they got to get rid of it. So,
okay, well, we made it through Ezra.
It's quite a book, isn't it?
It's a really great book.
I mean, it's crucial. And the history, knowing where the history is and how it's all going to happen. And even, how serious they take some of these things. Now, when we get to Nehemiah, we're going to have similar problems. But it's interesting how serious they take these foreign marriages and not obeying the law.
Well, and I think this will serve as a good setup for our next one,